everyone. I'm Barbara Ham Lee. Today's Another View is all about Black history. We have living history in our studio today as we meet some of the Hampton Institute students who said no to segregation in what is now known as the American Theater in Phoebus. Later in our broadcast, a preview of an upcoming PBS documentary about historically Black colleges and universities. Plus, part 3 of our Black History Month series, Excelling in Spite of Jim Crow. We're excited to share some little-known Black history, American history. Another View is next, so stay tuned.
Discussing today's topics from an African-American perspective, this is Another View.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Another View. I'm Barbara Ham Lee. We start today's program with a tribute to a pioneering pastor in Suffolk who passed away recently. Myrtle Hatcher was pastor of Main Street United Methodist Church in downtown Suffolk. She was the first African American and the first woman to pastor this historic, predominantly white church. She was loving and kind, proud of her heritage, and never afraid to stand up to racism and sexism. We will miss her. Another View profiled her husband, John Hatcher, when he was named first citizen of Portsmouth. Reverend Hatcher was a personal friend of mine. She married me and my husband, Maxie. Her memorial service is today, and we're here at Another View send our condolences to her family and friends. And just as Myrtle and John Hatcher were trailblazers, so were the 15 students from Hampton Institute who refused to sit in the colored-only balcony of the Lee Theater in Phoebus. Our guests today were front and center of the protest. Please welcome Lucy Edwards, who organized the sit-in. Hi, Lucy. How
Hello
are
there.
you?
Okay.
So happy to have you with us today. Thank you very
pleasure.
much. Hulbert James, who was president of the student chapter of the NAACP on Hampton Institute's campus and is joining us by phone. Hi, Hulbert. How are you? Good.
Okay.
Thank you so much for joining us. And Dr. Linda Holmes, oral historian and civil rights project expert at the Hampton History Museum. Linda, how you doing?
Great.
Good.
Great to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us. So I'm so excited to hear about this conversation. But Lucy, I'm going to ask you to set the stage for us a little bit in terms of what was happening on Hampton Institute's campus, what was happening in Hampton as you guys decided that you needed to take this stand.
Okay, I guess I should go all the way back to 57 when I arrived on that campus. I came to Hampton from a very rural community and rural school, and basically an exhausted person waiting to work her way through school. And that's basically what I was able to do, but I was also already an activist, and so I used to be I was very active with the NAACP's, I guess they were called college chapters, youth councils and college chapters, and eventually I became the state conference president. But on the campus, because I was so outspoken, I did, by the time that we got arrested at the Phoebus, already have kind of a bad reputation with the administration. They had said to me, if anybody goes home or if anybody gets arrested or anything happens on this campus, you're going to be the first to go. And that started when I got there in 57.
So where did your activism come from? Were you from your hometown?
Yeah.
And where was that?
West Point, Virginia, was just a few miles up the road there. And also I had family, friends. We were involved in trying to make sure we had a school to go to. Starting in 52, our black or colored school was closed, and our school board decided that they would send us out of town to the county black school. And we decided we weren't going because the white school was just 2 blocks away from the colored school or our school. So we went over to try to register, and we demonstrated, and we did all the other things. And so for all of the years from 8th grade to 12th grade, I guess I went to school wherever I could, whether it was New Jersey, Baltimore, and then back home in Virginia. And so by the time that I came to Hampton, I had all the stuff in my background, and they knew I was a crazy person that probably was going to insurrect the half of the campus, whatever.
So, Hulbert, you were the president of the NAACP student chapter during this time?
Yes.
Is that okay? And you were involved were you involved in the Woolworth sit-ins that happened prior to the March on Phoebus?
Yes, we were very involved. I mean, the Hampton students, as I think I mentioned to your producer, we had started coordinating and working very closely with student movements throughout the South. And so we were in touch with students with what became known as SNCC, which was formed after the Greensboro sit-in. Mm-hmm. But the NAACP and students we organized something called the Students for Human Dignity, which was a coalition of a number of the groups who were concerned about that. So yes, we had continual picketing. People basically used to march. It was easy to get from the campus downtown across the bridge to the Woolworth, which was on the other side of the bridge in Hampton. So we had continual picketing of that Woolworth without any student any arrests or anything like that. But we right after the sit-in movement started in Greensboro, mm-hmm. there was movement in Hampton with the Hampton students.
So why do you think, Hulbert, then, that you all didn't face, or did you face the taunting and the spitting and the throwing of food and the physical violence that other students from other HBCUs who also did sit-ins, such as at North Carolina A&T State University, for example, why didn't you all face that same thing?
Well, I mean, it's kind of a hard question to answer. My sense is that I think the students who faced it, because I've looked at some of these tapes and history, and, this is Black History Month, so there's a number of stations, PBS and others, are replaying stuff around what happened, particularly with Professor Gates. I mean, I think people who went inside the establishments, which was the case where the students in Woolworth actually, in Greensboro, actually sat down. I mean, that led to, patrons inside taunting and doing other things, including, I think those of us who were outside, didn't have that kind of challenge. I mean, yes, there was, cars and other people passing by in the streets and things like that. But I think the difference was whether you were outside picketing versus actually inside disrupting the business.
Oh, so the Hamptons sit-ins for the Woolworths did not happen inside. You protested outside.
I don't recall, unless Lucy has a different recollection. My recollection is that we basically did not ever go inside. We basically picketed the Woolworth.
Oh, well, Lucy, is that what your recollection?
My recollection's going to be kind of cloudy in that area because I was one of those students who did a little bit of everything at Hampton. And the very year that we were arrested at the Lee Theater, I had been away from the campus as an exchange student at Wittenberg University over in Ohio. And the exchange student who had come to Hampton in my place did go into Woolworths and did get coffee and other things, and there were students who went inside. But Hulbert is right. Walking outside with a sign was probably not quite as threatening. And one of the reasons that I was threatened by the administration at the time was that I used to say at the NAACP meetings, the Student Christian Association, I would say, it doesn't make sense to pay your money for segregation. Why would you spend your money to go and buy segregation? So I would say, I'm not going to Leggett's and buy anything. I'm not going to drink any colored water and whatever. And even coming from a community where that's the kind of thing that happened, but it was threatening, and the administration said, these kids are going to get arrested, and they're from all over the country, and you can't tell them to do stuff like that. What do you mean? They got to take the train home. They can't just protest. So that's kind of a preliminary to the Woolworth sit-ins, Hulbert. That's like a year or two before you got there.
Yeah, and we were going to delve more deeply into what happened at Lee. But Linda, let me come to you because you've been talking to students from Hampton Institute, now Hampton University, obviously, about this whole time, and they've been sharing their stories and so forth. And I thought I recollected that they were saying that there were students who went inside, they would sit for a while, they would get up, someone else would come sit. Am I right in that?
Yes.
True.
One of the things that's really interesting about the movement at Hampton is how comprehensive it was, and how it wasn't a moment in time, but it was several years that this movement continued. So some of the students that might have been, they had an incredible exchange program at Hampton Institute, which involved white colleges, coming to Hampton, as well as African American students going to other colleges across the country, participating. Lucy went to Cuba at one point on an exchange program. So a lot of the students were doing other things. But yes, in Hampton on February 12th, 3 students walked downtown to Woolworths and sat down at the counter. The next day, and this is what Hulbert is probably remembering, there were 200 students who came down carrying signs of protest. And then this movement developed into hundreds of students from Hampton who were not only protesting in Hampton, but were also involved with protest in Newport News, for example.
Now, I read an article from the Daily Press that was written a while ago that said that the feeling was that the Hampton protests were peaceful because whites and blacks got along in Hampton, and that because I hear Albert laughing, and that because of the Navy's presence, that was another reason why there was not the violence,
I would like to jump in.
That happened. So, okay, Linda, you start, and then I'm coming to you, Hulbert.
All right. It's interesting that it was in the Daily Press, because what I have learned that's so important about the Hampton movement is that the Hampton movement that happened in 1960 is actually a reflection of a law that was passed in Virginia, a law that prohibited assembly of African Americans in theaters, at baseball games, or whatever there was a public assemblage place.
It was actually
growing out of Hampton. So it was actually the editor of the Daily Press's wife who came to a program at Ogden Hall, and she got there kind of late, and so they kind of set aside a few seats for their white patrons. She ended up sitting next to African Americans. She was so outraged by having to sit next to African Americans in 1925 that her husband started a series of editorials saying, we're Anglo-Saxon, we fear, our white women with black men, and on and on and on. Very similar to the kinds of things that we actually hear today. And as a result of that editorial campaign in the Daily Press, there was legislation. Virginia was the first state and the only state in the country to encode in law that blacks would have to be in segregated areas and could not sit together in a movie theater or any place else where there was public assemblage. Now, we know about the streetcars and all of that, but Virginia was very unique in that way. Hampton is very unique in many ways. There was definitely racism, there was definitely Jim Crow, there was definitely segregation. But there's also this long history of Hampton Institute and their interaction with the white community in the ways that it interacted. But it was also in Hampton that the Anglo-Saxon Club was meeting. The students, and this is where Hulbert they can tell their stories of what they experienced before. Right. There are demonstrations in Hampton.
So, Hulbert, I heard you chuckling when I was talking about what I read. Go ahead.
Well, let me pick up a little bit from what Linda shared. I mean, I have a little history of Hampton. I came to Hampton in 1959. Unlike Lucy, that's from West Point and all of the other travels that she had. But I actually came out of, New York and the craziness of New York. But I had 2 brothers, one who came to Hampton in 1950 and graduated in 54, and another one who came in 54 and graduated in 58. So we had some history of what was going on in Hampton. It's one of the reasons I went to Hampton, because my two brothers had gone to Hampton, and they said, this is a great school and you should go there. It also had a history of attracting a large number, which I think is an issue, something we should explore depending on how much time we have. A large number, both Linda and Lucy mentioned the exchange program. There's also a large number of Caribbean and African students at Hampton. Again, this is the image at Hampton Institute, at that time Hampton Institute, had. So there was always a large number of African and Caribbean students at Hampton. And the third factor, which I was actually chuckling about, was that, there was always this image of Hampton, even among the HBCUs, as a different place. I mean, first of all, the endowment was always, many times more than even the next richest HBCU college. It also had, a very significant number of white faculty members, and some of whom, played an interesting role, mainly supportive, actually, of the students once that movement started. But many of these faculty members also lived in the community and had to deal with the community members. So part of, let me summarize by saying, I think part of, was this image and of Hampton as this cosmopolitan campus of exchange students, white students from the north, and African students and Caribbean students, and so it lended to an image, that this place was a fairly peaceful place.
And there was a private school. Outsiders did say y'all were like high cotton. I know. I've heard that.
Now.
You disagree with that, Lucy?
No, not totally. Let me just say that from 57 forward, the administration, the folks who ran the school, I'm not counting President Marone because he was the president of Hampton when I got there, but subsequently the administration that took over after he left was saying to us, listen, we live in this community. We're at peace. You can't be coming here telling folks that they can't go downtown and buy at the stores, or they can't go to the railroad stations and whatever.
So you were really rocking the boat.
Yes, and so I did. I had a person who was a vice president, happened to be white female, who said to me, listen, Miss Thornton, if anybody gets arrested, you will be the first to go. You will be on your way to West Point. And I'm thinking, golly, we don't even have a car in my family. Look. But that was before you got there, even, Hulbert. I would say about 58-ish. Yeah. But by the time that the sit-ins occurred, the atmosphere throughout the South was changing a little bit, enough so that folks knew that Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee was being established. Student leaders were coming forward and talking, and our administration was beginning to relax. But I mean, in those early years when I first got there, they were saying, oh no, you cannot keep standing up in the middle of an assembly and tell people they can't go downtown to Leggett's and they can't go to, I used to say, don't go to the Lee Theater. Why are you going to pay for segregation?
So let's talk about the Lee Theater, and let's talk about how did you organize first the students, and give me a sense of what you were thinking as you all were marching over to pay your money to go into that theater that day.
Okay, now Hulbert is probably better at the organizing part of it because, as I said, at that point I had just come home for spring break from Wittenberg University up in Springfield, Ohio, and I was spending my break at Hampton, and so there was a large array of students who were already going to Woolworth and doing other things. And Hulbert, I don't know, did you have to do something special to get everybody else to go? I know I didn't have any problem to the Lee Theater.
Well,
I didn't have any problem.
I don't think so. My sense is, and this is probably also we should invoke a name of somebody that Linda has talked to me about, and I know, Lucy, we miss him dearly, was Kennell Jackson.
Oh, yeah.
Who shared a very similar situation. He was Kennell Jackson, who actually had to leave Prince Edward County because for the same situation you had to leave.
Right.
Because they closed the school there and ended up going to Hampton schools in the Hampton area. Cannell was, sort of I would say, the intellectual giant among us, and was a very, went on to Stanford University with a full professorship later on. But there was a number of people, to be very specific, and I think there's some articles about this. There was a decision made by the National Student Movement that after a year of sit-ins and other activities, that we needed to move the movement to the theater. So that was a conscious national decision.
Okay.
To have a sit-in and to have sit-in activities at theaters. So we weren't alone in making that decision. As a matter of fact, there were sit-ins at several theaters throughout the South on February 1st, 1961, which again was the first anniversary of the sit-in in Greensboro.
Right.
So we had been in touch with these movements. We had been part of, the student movement in the South, and so that we were conscious that there was going to be activities on February 1st, 1961, to commemorate the Greensboro sit-in, and that the theaters would be the focus. So it was so using the national perspective and regional perspective, we started talking to people that, yes, we now at Hampton, after a year, and I think we always said in Hampton we had one of the longest continuous, which is one of the points that Linda was making, picketing movement. Some other schools picketed for a week or a month, but we continued for a year from February 1960 all the way to 6, that it was time now for us to go the next step. And to get arrested, and although things may have gotten a little better, Lucy, we were still being threatened by the administration. They have gotten along with the picketing after a year. I mean, they couldn't do anything with hundreds of students picketing, but they were still, sort of sending signals out that anyone, getting arrested, that this would not be a welcome activity. On behalf of students.
Okay.
I think the thing that also helped us and throughout this process was the NAACP chapter in Hampton and Newport News was very supportive. Mm-hmm. And one of the first things we had to do, as a matter of fact, I was the one that had to have some of those conversations, was we were in touch with the attorney, W. Hill Thompson, who was one of the pioneer legal minds in the state of Virginia. And he lived in Newport News and was the attorney and was able to talk to us about what we should expect, what would go on. So students were prepared. The NAACP, and again going back to some of the faculty members, quietly some of them indicated that if there's going to be bail money, that they would think. So we had to assure people that that there would be legal help available and that there would be bail money available. But I think people after a year of picketing were ready now to take the next step
it up to the next level.
Arrested.
But Lucy, I want to know, because I think people, especially young people today, who have not had the experience of growing up during the civil rights movement, and the whole idea of making up your mind that you're going to deliberately break the law. You're going into this theater. You're going to sit where they told you can't sit. What was happening in your brain as you were buying your ticket, as you were going into that theater?
That wasn't easy for me because I guess there's an element of protest that has been kind of part of my life, if you will, for a very long time.
So you were excited.
Oh, yeah. Listen, I think I went to every march that Martin Luther King ever showed up and that Harry Belafonte ever showed up at Washington. I was probably there from the 40s forward, okay? And I was born in 39, so it's not but anyway, I was already into doing things like, going to the local drugstore and ordering an ice cream, and I would ease myself down on the stool, and if they brought the ice cream and said, "Oh, you can't eat that in here," I'd say, "Well, I don't want the ice cream," and they would have a wasted ice cream. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Or if you got on a bus going from West Point to Richmond, about 40 miles, and you sat close to the front of the bus, much closer than the driver wanted you to, the driver would come back and say, "Miss, we're not moving this bus unless you get to the back of the bus." And you, of course, had a choice that I used to have quite frequently, which was, okay, my mama, my papa, my Grandpa, none of them, we had no cars. We could only go to Richmond by bus. And so the question was, if it was late in the evening, what in the world am I going to do if I get left out here on this road with no way home? So you'd protest as long as you could. And then he said, okay, the bus isn't moving until she moves. Well, you'd go through. So I'd had some incidents like that as part of growing up. So I guess I'm in a way a child of protest.
Gotcha. If you're just joining us, it's another View History lesson on the Hampton Institute sit-ins with Lucy Edwards, who organized the sit-in, Hulbert James, president of the student chapter of the NAACP, and Dr. Linda Holmes, oral historian and civil rights project expert at Hampton History Museum. So, Hulbert, you got arrested?
Yes.
And were there ramifications in terms of your profession later? What did you ultimately wind up doing professionally, and was that a factor?
Well, actually, people talk with all of this stuff today about security clearance. I always smile to myself about this because I'm always tempted to not put my arrest on it, but I actually went ahead and put it on it because actually for a number of people, it became a badge of courage. So I actually wanted to become an attorney. I left Hampton early to go to Howard Law School, but didn't finish law school, but got very involved in the civil rights movement as a full-time organizer. I was one of the lead organizers nationally. For the National Welfare Rights Movement, organization of welfare mothers, and was the deputy head of the New York movement, which was the largest chapter. We had about 50,000 welfare mothers in New York organized, and went to jail about 20 times then, and then was very involved in black political activities, the National Black Political Party, but was always very involved in more, I would call, more mainstream political activities. Worked in the McGovern campaign in 1972. Worked in Clinton campaign. Became our deputy campaign person in New York. Ran Jesse Jackson's campaign in New York State, and was on his national staff, and then headed up the Citizens Education Fund, which is his voter registration arm. Okay. So Hampton was a training ground. I continued to be an activist. Been to jail about 30 or 40 times since the Lee sit-in. And I actually worked for John Lewis, and we used to talk about who went to jail the most.
Oh, wow.
At one point in our conversations, but yeah, I mean, you worried about it a little, and actually the two places there was a concern. Actually, getting back, and it'd be interesting. Lucy kept talking about her family and history. My family was against my involvement in all of this stuff. To be quite honest, this is not why we saved up our few pennies, to send you to college, and and as I said, I had two brothers who had gone to Hampton and had graduated. And so I was supposed to go to Hampton and get my degree and, not be involved in all this stuff. But I didn't have all of the history that Lucy's talked about in terms of her situation, but I actually had been an activist even in my high school days. I mean, I was known, which is interesting, again, this being Black History Month, as the Mau Mau. I went to high school, Stuyvesant High School, which some people may know. Stuyvesant High School is one of these top high schools in New York City. It's a school that was actually close to the World Trade Center that blew up recently. But there was 9 blacks in my graduating class of 800.
Wow.
And so very early on, I became very sensitive to this issue of what's going on here. And this is the 50s again, 56, 57, 58, and I remember specifically there was an attempt to get some students from Stuyvesant High School to cross a picket line that was being organized by 1199, the hospital workers union back then. And I organized the students to say, no, we're not crossing a picket line. I mean, that's, our parents.
So you've been active. You've been active for a very, very long time. And
even before I came to Hampton, there was, this activism, that was there. And the only other thing I'll quickly add, I know you have a lot more questions you want to ask.
I know we do.
So go ahead.
And I just want to make a point about
okay, because I don't want to run out of time. That's the only thing.
Can I say one quick thing that Hulbert may not know? Hale Thompson had been put out of Hampton Institute as a student in the 30s because he and others were of the opinion that it was time for Hampton to have a black dean of women. And, you know the background and the history of Hampton, and you know how we grew out of Civil War and all of that, and how we've always had large contingencies of white instructors and teachers and administration. Well, they said we've got to have a black or colored dean of women. Some of them were put out of school. Fortunately, Hale was able to come back. There was enough student support, enough other things. And so Hale had said to me in my very first year at Hampton that if anything we did resulted in an arrest or anything like that, he and others with the Old Dominion Bar and other lawyers like him would be there to support us. They would make sure they found people to go our bond and whatever else. And so, but Hale was that mentor who was really good.
So, Lucy, were you, and I understand, you knew you were going to be arrested,
Yeah.
but did it scare you still going to jail?
No, not really.
No.
Not by. Not by.
Although I knew the answer.
Not by then.
Okay.
No,
Not then.
Not
Go
by
ahead.
then.
Go ahead, Linda.
Yeah, no, one of the things that I learned when I was doing the interviews with the Hampton Institute students, that these are organizer activists, didn't, stand up people, and they don't spend time celebrating themselves because they are celebrating the work that needs to be done, the work getting done. Mm-hmm. But the Lee Theater demonstrations are historically significant in Virginia. Lee Theater was the first theater demonstration where the students were actually arrested, and that the case went to the court first, and you were talking about Hale Thompson, but went to the court in Hampton, and eventually went to the Virginia Supreme Court. So at that point, the case was initially, they wanted to argue it on constitutional grounds, the lawyer did, and it became a trespassing case. So they kind of tried to skirt the issue a bit. But what Henry Marsh said many years later about this case is really important. And that is that this case that went through the courts, and because it went to the Virginia Supreme Court, is recognized as the case that opened the door for the ending of segregation in theaters in the entire state of Virginia. And I'm quoting Henry Marsh, of course, who we know is another prominent
Henry
civil
Marsh
rights
on our show before,
attorney.
yes.
So again, they don't go around blowing their horn about what they did in this demonstration because, like he said, there were many, many more to come. And these are activists who are still activists.
Absolutely.
The activism has never ended. But I think that there is reason to pause and to celebrate the work of the Hampton students in general because Zachary McKernan, who was teaching there, said many of the students at Hampton had no idea they were involved with the the Black Lives Matter movement and other movements, but did not understand that there was this standing up of Hampton Institute students from the very beginning of Hampton Institute history.
Let's talk to Jeff in Hampton. Hi, Jeff. You on the air?
Yes. How you doing?
Okay.
I'm enjoying the conversation. I just want to let you know I'm 50 plus years of age, and I was, how can I put it? I was sent to the barbershop to go get my hair cut. And I always went to the same barber, constantly get my hair cut because my dad was a stickler for that. But one day I went to get my hair cut, and I didn't bring my money, and my father came to pay the barber, and the barber realized that my father was a dark-skinned African-American. The barber refused to cut my hair because my hair was too curly.
So you
went. This was in the city of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania.
This was in Philly.
This was in Philly. Back in 1971, 72, something like that. Well, long story short, my mother, love her to death. She's going strong. Was a member of the Black Panther Association at the time. Well, basically, they closed it down. They closed the business down. They forced the man to close his business. City of Philadelphia was supporting the gentleman because he's been there all along, blah, blah, this, blah, blah, that. But Black Panther Association literally shut him down by picketing his building. And I want to tell you that my cousin, Janet Brown, is one of the first black graduates of William & Mary. They just had their 100th anniversary of William & Mary this past week.
Wow. Lots and lots of Black history in our area. Thanks so much for the call, Jeff. We appreciate it. So this notion then that the students from Hampton Institute were so instrumental in making a change statewide in the way that Jim Crow laws affected people. What other stories have you heard, Linda, when you interviewed other students? What did they tell you?
Well, I think that what is really important to understand is that, first of all, Hampton Institute students were the first group of students to stage the World War sit-ins in the state of Virginia as well. And of course, they came in rapid fire after that. And I think it's also significant that the Hampton students were very much involved with developing alliances in the community. So there were several times where they had their rallies at a church in the community. There was a Black Catholic church that was right near the campus. There were other churches that were very much involved. This Committee for Human Dignity that was mentioned earlier by Hulbert, there was a community-based committee. There was also faculty involved, and so that it was it wasn't a singular student movement per se, but there were allies among the faculty, there were allies in the community, and so that moving forward, that they established, I think, a model for activism that is relevant today, and that the fact that they did not say, we're doing this to get on TV, we're doing this to make a media appearance, we're just now almost 50 or 60 years later hearing these stories because these students have been about the work.
About the work that needs to be done. So, Hulbert, we've only got about 5 minutes left in this conversation. So what I want to ask you is, as you speak to young activists today, give them some sense or an idea of a piece of advice that you could give them in terms of being an activist today and what it takes.
Well, I think you have to stand up for what you believe in. I mean, I've been interested, again, here I'm in Miami, which is about 40 miles from the shooting in Florida.
Yeah.
And it's been interesting watching these high school students talking about the need for action. The question is whether they will take action. I mean, it's like they're appealing to adults to take action. I think the difference for us, and
that's a really good point.
The story
that's a very good
Lucy's
point.
telling it
Yes.
up. So, I mean, we decided we had to take action.
Yes.
If we had waited for the adults, whether it was in Hampton or any of the other things. And the other point I would quickly make is that we also were still students. We were not full-time, agitators, organizers. We still had to get our A's and B's from
Yes.
school. And Lucy graduated, I graduated. So we, in addition to this extracurricular activities, if you will, we still had our curricular activities. So I would say stand your ground, but you have to take action. If this is what you believe, it starts with you.
Thank you so very much. That's Hulbert James, and he was back then president of the student NAACP and very active on campus in terms of his activist work. Thank you so much for joining us from Miami. Okay, Miss Lucy, what other piece of advice would you give?
I think that you really have to stand for what you believe. And if you get an idea in your head and in your mind, your parents will stand with you, and others whom you may not ever have thought of as supporters, they will stand. And I'm telling you now, even though there was that big fear of what are they going to do with your arrest when you get out of law school and you need to be admitted to the bar in D.C. or you need to be admitted to the bar in Texas. Sure, they raised questions and they said things like, oh, you were arrested. Wow. Were you a part of the NAACP?
So you became an attorney?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Some 50, 60 years ago now. Yes, yes.
She was advisor to the Black
absolutely.
Student Organization at Howard when Stokely Carmichael was heading it.
Yes,
Okay.
I used to be involved with the group, and I guess I've had kind of a supportive role to a lot of things over the last 50, 60 years, but involvement with people like I wouldn't have met Rosa Parks and known her intimately but for Hampton Institute, because she came to Hampton at a point when Alabama was saying to her, we don't even want you to take a job cleaning people's houses.
Wow.
And Hampton welcomed her to come. And I was one of those students who worked to get through school. And so at Holly Tree Inn, there I could sit and talk and learn to know Rosa Parks with Snick Stokely Carmichael, very dear friend and very dear. I was able to consult with. So it gave opportunities that I would not have been thinking about even as a youngster.
Wow.
So do what your heart tells you.
Oh my goodness, I could talk to you for all hour. You just have so much history.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, so that is Miss Lucy Edwards, and she was also a student at Hampton Institute and was instrumental in ending segregation at the Lee Theater, which is now known as the American Theater. Thank you so much. And Linda, you have the last 2 minutes or so.
Well, I think that one of the things that I would say to the students and to the younger generation is to know your history, to know that it's not just about Black History Month, knowing your history, but reaching out to the people in your community. No matter where you are in the African American community, there are going to be stories that are being told about people who did stand up, by people who did not accept, whether it was police brutality, whether it was segregation, and that we just need to take the time and across the age span to sit down and find out, what worked, what didn't work, and incorporate that into our understanding of the struggle absolutely continues.
And you've done oral histories with other students from Hampton Institute. Are you going to be doing others in the future?
The Hampton History Museum received a grant from the Virginia Humanities Foundation to do the first series of interviews, which are videotaped, and they are accessible online.
Yes, you can.
Through the Hampton History Museum, or simply by tapping into the Google bar Hampton History sit-ins. And we hope to continue with this project. As you can tell, and I'm sure the audience can tell, that this story has many, 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 many chapters.
Absolutely.
So, maybe a documentary, maybe a book, but this is just the beginning.
Thank you so much. That's Dr. Linda Holmes, oral historian and civil rights project expert at Hampton History Museum. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. So Hampton Institute, now Hampton University, is one of 105 historically Black colleges and universities across the United States. And while these institutions were and still are so critical to the education of African Americans, there was no one central place to go find out about their history until now. On Monday, February 19th at 9 p.m., WHRO TV 15 will air Tell Them We Are Rising, a documentary by filmmaker Stanley Nelson that documents 150 years of HBCUs and education. Our Lisa Godley spoke with archival researcher Dr. Vandora Williams about the significance of this film.
1 by 1, 2 by 2, 3 by 3, and the 4 by 4. Take all the members to read them, oh, read them, let me go. Read them, John.
The more that a system denies you the chance to read and to write, the more that thing, reading and writing, becomes valuable, becomes precious, becomes a prize that you must have.
On several occasions, I went as far as a schoolhouse door with one of my young mistresses. I had the feeling that getting into that schoolhouse would be the same as getting into paradise. Booker T. Washington.
Thank you for taking time out to tell us about Tell Them We Are Rising, the story of Black colleges and universities.
Glad to be here.
Let's go back to the late 19th century and explain a little bit about the importance of the HBCUs and how they came about.
Sure. It was right after the end of the Civil War, and especially in the South, African Americans were in a very bad way, as that they were free, but they did not get paid for working on plantations. They did not have any housing of their own, any education or whatsoever. So they were in a dire straits. They were also left to be used by whites during that time to get them back into a contractual slave labor. So there were some white American missionaries who came down to the South and saw the conditions of the African Americans and knew that they needed to be educated. That was the way to really lift this generation of people out of the conditions that they were in.
Despite the violence and intimidation, the shortage of teachers and resources, the black colleges in the South survived. And they began to produce their first graduates. Many of whom were formerly enslaved.
General O. Howard, for whom Howard University is named, he was going around looking at the plight of African Americans, and he ran across students and he asked, "What shall I tell the people up north about the plight of the former slaves?" And the 13-year-old Richard Robert Wright rose and said, "Tell them we're rising."
The one thing that they did not expect was that the African Americans, after being educated, decided that, you know what? We want some of this curriculum changed. We want to learn more about our history. We want more liberal arts curriculum versus vocational training. And because of that push and because of that training, they created the generation that taught the civil rights activists of the 50s and 60s.
The New York Times had this story on 4 students who had sat in at a Woolworth store, and that was absolutely earth-shaking. Every one of us knew full well that they were either the bravest people in the world or the craziest people in the world.
As the students graduated, they were encouraged to go back into their community to teach the people in their towns and in their cities how to read and write. And that's a major thing that HBCUs did that really helped the African American community. They got trained, they went back into their community and taught others who could not go. And therein lies that real tight-knit community that we had for a very, very long time.
For Another View, I'm Lisa Godwin.
And Vandora Williams used to be a producer here at WHRO and also worked at Hampton University. On Monday, February 19th at 9 p.m., we will air Tell Them We Are Rising. And also, just to let you know, in case you don't know, the producer and the audio engineer of Another View are proud graduates of Norfolk State University, which is an HBCU. And yours truly is a proud graduate of Bennett College, which is out of Greensboro, North Carolina, another HBCU. So each week during February, we're bringing you the stories of members of First Baptist Church Berkeley who survived and thrived during the Jim Crow era. Jim Crow laws impacted generations, denying many the ability to achieve their dreams. These discriminatory practices went on for so long that some were able to witness their children achieve the dreams that they could not. In part 3 of Excelling in Spite of Jim Crow, Andrew Neal shares his family stories of a dream deferred.
Back in the 1940s, my dad was a college graduate from South Carolina State, had a degree in chemistry. And he taught for a few years in Beaufort, South Carolina. And when the war effort started, he recognized the fact that he couldn't feed his family as well. And he decided to come back to Norfolk. He went to Norfolk Naval Shipyard to try and determine whether they had a position available for chemistry in the war effort. And they indicated that they had never seen a black chemist, as though chemistry was color specific. As a result, he was not allowed to be employed at Norfolk Naval Shipyard as a chemist. And he took a job which was basically well beneath his qualification. He became a laborer, but it satisfied the goal of being able to provide for the family in a positive way. Fast forward some 26 years, and I'm a new graduate out of North Carolina A&T. And they were at the point of deciding that they were going to hire engineers to fund a program which dealt with overhauling and refueling nuclear power plants. And they were canvassing various colleges to find talent who could provide that kind of experience and education. Also, Norfolk Naval Shipyard was going through pretty much a catharsis because they were not providing opportunities for blacks the same way they were for other members of the community. So I had a friend who was employed as an engineer at Norfolk Naval Shipyard who said, "You're graduating from A&T, and I would like for you to put an application into what is now being developed as the Nuclear Power Division of Norfolk Naval Shipyard." And I went ahead and did that because they were trying their best to get some African Americans into that program, and they were not accepting it. So I made my application to that program directly at the behest of these engineers who were already at Norfolk Naval Shipyard, who were finding it very difficult to enter into that program. As a matter of fact, I got accepted. I was the first African American to be given an opportunity to enroll in that program. Being a new first individual, I expected to be treated like a pioneer. You know, things would be said behind my back. I would have to overlook them. I'd have to just concentrate on doing what I was employed to do and to do the very best. I did have one supervisor at one time who said that if your performance doesn't improve, I will promote you to the next level. But he never gave me a reason why that perhaps would be the case. As things would have it, when that year came, he was no longer my boss. Everybody who engages in a first, particularly in the setting of equal opportunity, should expect to be confronted with certain things. And so I overlooked a lot of things just to be sure that I would have the ability to make it to the next level, which in turn provides a substance for those who are going to follow me. I was interested in being sure that I presented the image that a person from an African American community, historically black university, had the ability to do the same thing any of these pedigree colleges could produce. So being able to achieve status of being a nuclear engineer was a benefit to my dad too, who was still living, who saw his son achieve something that he couldn't achieve.
For Another View, I'm Lisa Godley.
Black history, American history. Two events to remind you about before we leave you today. First, February 19th, that's this coming Monday, is the last day to submit your literary work for consideration for our Writer's Block, the Lorraine Hansberry edition. Go to whrv.org/writersblock to submit your work or to register to attend and listen to great literary talent. The event is Friday, February 23rd at 7, right here at WHRO Public Media, and I get to serve as your MC, so I hope to see your face in the place. It's a wonderful event. Please submit your work. And Saturday, February 17th is the Decades of Dance event, raising scholarship funds for students studying hospitality in any of our local colleges and universities. Dress up in your favorite decade and come dance the night away at the Virginia Beach Convention Center from 7 until 11 p.m. Visit vbttf.com for more information. Next week on Another View, it's Another View on Health with cardiologist Dr. Keith Newby. We'll talk about the effect of love on your health. Our theme music was composed and performed by Jay Sennett. Lisa Godley is our show producer. Victor Bowen is our audio engineer, and Paris Bogle answered our phones. I'm Barbara Ham Lee. Thank you so very, very much for listening to Another View.